Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going to be talking about the history of Santa Claus. You know, Chris, when we think about the history of Santa Claus, what Santa Claus is like today, and where it started, you know, it's been quite a journey for good old Saint Nick.
Yeah, it's that time of year as we think about it. We're about 2 weeks out from Christmas, and we travel up and down the roads, and we see the lights, and we see the inflatables, and whether you are a child or a child at heart, everyone loves Santa Claus. There's just something special, magical and beautiful about Santa Claus, and we all wake up with great anticipation on Christmas Day. Maybe we were the ones who had all of the gifts and had the experiences, but any child can tell you that while Santa Claus is from the North Pole, his historical journey is really fascinating and it's interesting. And Ray, I think it really is a perfect podcast for us to discuss, especially with some interesting historical facts that maybe we should know, but we didn't.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people who don't know, where Santa Claus come from. Maybe they've heard of St. Nicholas. Maybe they've heard of some other version of Santa Claus. But the exact origin of Santa Claus, where he comes from, and how he's evolved over the ages is something a lot of people, I think, don't know. It's something that over the past, I'd say 10 years or so, I've become more familiar with Santa Claus. We used to teach a class here at the college called Myths and Legends. And I would actually have a lecture on the history of Santa Claus, in the context of myth. Which, when we think about myth, it doesn't necessarily mean untrue. A myth can just be an old story or some story that tells a moral tale of some sort. And so when we think about St. Nicholas, one thing that I found very interesting is this goes a long way back. This isn't a recent historical phenomenon. St. Nicholas actually begins in the 4th century AD, so only about, 400 years after the life of Christ, in what is today the nation of Turkey, where you have a guy called Nicholas who becomes a bishop of a town called Myra, and he's later on, he's going to be canonized, I guess, by the Catholic Church, and he's going to become one of the most important figures in Christmas history, at least, in the sense of the celebration of Christmas. And you see him made a patron saint of various different nations, including the Netherlands, and where we sort of get this first glimpse of Santa Claus as we know him today. And Chris, I think that the whole way he was honored during the Feast of St. Nicholas, that's always fascinating to me. Because a lot of things we practice when it comes to Santa Claus today are things that started there.
And I think we really need to do justice to Santa Claus and to St. Nick and go back and recognize that this image of Santa Claus has morphed into something totally different than when St. Nick was first on the scene. I mean, when he was first on the scene, he was neither fat nor was he jolly, but he actually had a reputation of being fiery, and he was kind of skinny. And here's the very interesting thing is he was a defender of church doctrine, and he was really big on making sure, because of course this is the time during the Great Persecution, they're burning Bibles, and they're telling people, if you say that you're a Christian, you face execution. And so he comes in and he is adamant about making sure that the rights for Christians is something that they have the opportunity to believe in. And that's where this idea of St. Nick becoming a protector comes in, because he will be a protector, and not just a protector of Christians, but he's a protector of many different types of people. Maybe it's sailors, he's protector of, as you mentioned, countries, prisoners, but ultimately he becomes known as a protector of children. And I think that's where this story of Santa Claus comes, because he will be this patron to the children. He's a magical gift bringer, and I found it was interesting that here he is a defender of the faith, but also a defender of the children. So not this ho, 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 jolly kind of guy, but he is adamant in ensuring that the liberty of people is protected and they're able to proclaim it.
Yeah, and you mentioned that, the modern version of Santa Claus, this sort of chubby, jolly guy with a long beard and stuff, in the Netherlands, the early image of Saint Nicholas, he's wearing a bishop's hat and the robe of a bishop, and he's riding on a donkey. A pretty, if you actually look at images from this, it's a pretty big donkey. It looks more like a horse to me. But he's not jolly. He's not ho ho ho. He looks like more of a religious figure, a solemn, serious religious figure at that. But they believed in the Netherlands that he would come in and bring them presents. But what they did, instead of putting out stockings for Saint Nicholas, they would fill their shoes with straw for Santa Claus's donkey to eat, and then in the morning they would wake up and find presents in their shoes. So it's it's like you said, it's a totally different image of Saint Nicholas, but you do see some early indications of what's later to come. Children today live milk and cookies, or at least they did when we were growing up. Milk and cookies out for Santa Claus, the stockings instead of the clogs, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I want to go back to this concept that you talked about as far as Santa Claus being both real and also a myth. And there's two really, I found, interesting stories about the early life of Saint Nick and how he became the patron saint of children. And, there was one tale in which I guess we would call him Bishop Nicholas at the time, because it's later when he's canonized as a saint. But, when Bishop Nicholas saved these three young girls from a life of prostitution because he was able to deliver 3 bags of gold to the father who was in debt. And he was able to use those for dowries, which saved those 3 children. So there it is, once again, this magical gift bringing, right? This opportunity to save people and to help people. But I found another story that isn't well known, and it's not talked about, but I just found it weird and just... I'll just tell the story, and that is that Bishop Nicholas had entered an inn where an innkeeper had just murdered 3 boys. And I know we're supposed to be talking about the Merry Christmas, but here's kind of how he becomes the patron saint of children. But this innkeeper had just murdered 3 young boys, and he had taken their dismembered bodies and put them in these basement barrels. And the bishop sensed the crime, but not only did he know the crime had taken place, but the myth or the legend comes that he resurrected the victims, and that is how he became known as the patron saint of children, where he was always there to protect and to take care. And he appears as this white-bearded man who has magical powers. He can fly, he can resurrect, and he also ensures that people do good, that they say their prayers, that they practice their good behavior. And I think, Ray, that this is where the church kind of wants to draw attention away from all of this, right? Because we have the birth of Jesus. And as we have the birth of Jesus, we start having these conflicting narratives that start going on. And so the church kind of leans more to the image of Jesus and to what he is doing, because he's not as magical and mythical, if you will, to Saint Nick here.
Yeah, and you think about the magical aspect of Saint Nicholas, you quickly have images of Saint Nicholas, of Sinterklaas, flying through the air in a wagon and dropping presents down chimneys for good little boys and girls. And you talk about, early on you talked about, he was a defender of the children, but also, he was someone who enforced good behavior, good morals. Have you been good? If you're not good, what do you get for Christmas?
Yeah, you get that coal.
Or switches. That was what I was told when I was a kid. You'd get switches. I think,
And they had and didn't they have images of Santa Claus who was or Saint Nick coming around with like a birch rod in his hand or something?
Yeah, and some of the early images of Santa, I know we're sort of veering here, but some of the early drawings of Santa were sort of scary. I mean, he did not look friendly. Certainly did not look jolly. Sort of looked a little mischievous, almost like a elf of some sort.
Yeah, and I think that we start to see this change that happens. You mentioned the Netherlands, and in the Netherlands, the kids and the families they didn't want to give up Saint Nicholas as a gift bringer, and so as we start seeing them come to the New World and come to the Americas, they start bringing. I think they called him Santa Claus.
Mm-hmm.
I think they start bringing Santa Claus, and they start wanting to be a change from this scary gift bringer to a more jolly, happy kind of individual. But Ray, I found it interesting that in early America, Christmas really wasn't like Christmas that we know of today. That the holiday was actually shunned in New England.
Yeah.
And I think the Puritans...
Puritans, what we call the Pilgrims, they did not celebrate Christmas. As a matter of fact, William Bradford of Plymouth Plantation tells of an account where a group of new settlers had come into Plymouth and they wanted to celebrate Christmas, and the colony's leaders sort of tolerate it a little bit, and they go away and work, and when they come back in the afternoon, these people celebrating Christmas are having fun, and it's sort of looked down upon. It's not a biblical holiday. You don't find it in the New Testament. So there was certainly a looking down upon the very idea of Christmas, much less something like Santa Claus.
Yeah, because you're absolutely right. What had happened is this was an outdoor festival, if you will. Mm-hmm. It was fueled by alcohol. There was rowdy behavior, and the early church is like, this is more of a pagan festival instead of anything relating to the church, and therefore we're not going to celebrate it. We're not going to be a part of it. And I think that we're now moving up to what, the 19th century into the 1800s, right. And as we have taken Santa Claus around the world, we will fly him in here to North America. And honestly, we owe our understanding of Christmas and our understanding of Santa Claus today to basically a series of poets and writers who make Christmas come alive and turn it into what we know it today as a family celebration.
Yeah, there was a poem actually, that was written called A Visit from St. Nicholas.
Yeah, but nobody knows A Visit from St. Nicholas.
Nobody knows it. They know
what?
The Night Before Christmas. That sort of got the ball rolling on our view of Santa Claus. It is interesting, though, that I found out the guy who wrote it, I think his last name was Clement, didn't want this poem to go out. It was just something for his family, for his kids, whatever. And he actually was resistant to the idea of getting it published, but it got published and it went out. Then you come to the American Civil War, and you have a guy called Thomas Nast who drew an image of Santa Claus more along the lines of what we're used to, sort of this jolly, heavy-set guy, in a way to sort of maybe cheer up the troops around Christmas time.
And it is with Thomas Nast when we really start seeing the image become of a jolly, chubby, grandfatherly face of Santa. So we've taken away, and we invite our listeners to just do Google searches of Santa Claus in the past, in Germany, in Denmark, and in all of these places, and you'll start to see the transformation that happens, and we find here is Santa, a new and loving and embraced Santa Claus.
Yeah, and it's also here where you get the idea of him being, this sort of jolly old man, but it's also where we see a switch from green as far as his clothing, his robes. We see that switch from green to red. There's often this thought that Coca-Cola was responsible for that, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But it's actually Nast that actually switches in some of his cartoons when he draws him, that he shows him with a red suit on.
Yeah, and I think, you have to understand kind of American society during this time, that life is beginning to change. The old way of what the Puritans had expected of a rigid life, a strict life that is devoid of fun and entertainment, there becomes this priority of family life, and the importance of the children being at the focus of all that is going on. During childhood, it's a stage of life. There's greater protection, there's sheltering, there's training, there's education that is needed, and so now you have St. Nicholas who takes on new attributes, right? Because what does Santa Claus have the opportunity to do? He provides training. He provides education. Santa Claus is watching you. It's not designed in a negative way, but it's designed to promote good behavior. It's designed to wrestle up a nation that is not the raucous crowd that we had experienced earlier, but more of a family-centered crowd that will allow individuals to enjoy time with each other, but also to have a good atmosphere. I found it interesting that during this time, one of the things, I think it was in a book, one of the first books in 1821, it was called The Children's Friend, and it was talking about Santa Claus. And it talks about how Santa Claus came from the north in a sleigh and had flying reindeer, and Santa Claus rewards good behavior and punishes bad, as you mentioned earlier. But I thought this was funny. As part of the book, it says this: leaving a long black birchen rod directs a parent's hand to use when virtue's path his sons refuse. Gifts were safe toys, a pretty doll, peg top, or a ball. No crackers, canyons, squibs, or rockets to blow their eyes up or their pockets. No drums to stun their mother's ear, nor swords to make their sisters fear. But pretty books to store their mind with knowledge of each various kind. So you have this image, and everybody dreads the blasted drum set that is received for Christmas, because full of noise and things of that nature. And parents, go back to the old Santa Claus book here, and you'll see that Santa Claus wasn't really big on bringing drums to stun your mother's ears, nor also swords to strike the sister's fear.
Yeah, nowadays he just brings Red Ryder BB guns.
That's right.
Shoot your eye out, kid.
Right.
So things, we talk about Santa Claus through the ages, and really up until the 1930s, not much changes. This idea that, you'd seen him sort of softened a little bit through the Civil War from some earlier images. But then 1931, Coca-Cola gets involved in the mix of trying to maybe make Santa a little bit more approachable, a little bit more child friendly. So there's this guy called Haddon Sundblom, and he works there for Coca-Cola. I believe he was part of the advertising wing of the company. He looks to the story we talked about just a minute ago, the night before Christmas, to sort of define Santa Claus. And, this jolly man in a red suit coming down the chimney, giving gifts to children, that kind of thing. But it's interesting that he calls on a friend of his, a guy called Lou Prentice. And I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this name right, who would portray Santa Claus as a live model. So the image that you see from Coca-Cola during that time of Santa Claus, and maybe to some degree contributing to what we see today as Santa Claus, comes from this Lou Prentice man, who was this sort of live model. And when Lou Prentice passed away, Sundblom began using himself as a model for Santa Claus, looking in a mirror, drawing and painting by looking in a mirror. So you have this very much more family-friendly, much more approachable version of Santa Claus appear in the early 1930s, and that's when you start seeing advertising with Santa Claus coming down the chimney, delivering toys, eating cookies, drinking milk, playing with the toys, reading a letter from a kid. All of these kind of things really start in the early to mid 20th century.
Yeah, and I'm going to be honest. I had a question when you were mentioning that, because we all know the history of him coming down the chimney, and we have the milk and the cookies. Mm-hmm. So I got to thinking, that's a lot of milk and cookies. And there's actually research that's been done on this, right?
Right.
There was a Pew survey done that said that 49% of adults with children were planning to make preparations for Santa to come on Christmas Eve. 22% of adults who do not have children were also making preparations for Santa to come. Now, think about this. If 49% of the United States households with children are making preparations, that's 18.1 million households. Add the 22% who are no children but are making preparations for Santa's arrival, that's another several million. So, doing the math, according to this research, there are 36 million households that are going to leave Santa cookies and milk for Christmas Eve.
I hope he's not lactose intolerant.
Well, that too. And think about this. The average is you leave 2 cookies out and an 8-ounce glass of milk, which means on Christmas Eve when Santa is out there, Ray, he will consume 9.9 billion calories just in America. Now, if Santa is a 60-year-old, quite hefty individual going up and down the chimney, think about this. How on earth does he consume all of that, 9.9 billion calories, and he returns year after year and he's at the same weight? How does he do it?
It's all magic.
Oh.
It has to be the magic of Christmas.
And he's in good health.
And he's in good health. Well, I mean, he lives forever. He doesn't change. I mean, he started in the 4th century AD, and we're in the 21st century AD now, so he's been around for quite some time.
I just found that interesting. And I think one thing else that, kind of going back to the serious side of this, is that Saint Nick actually starts out as this religious defender, right? Mm-hmm. And remember that we've kind of taken this path where people kind of moved him away from the religious aspect.
Right.
Well, these German immigrants in America who actually loved Christmas began saying, wow, look at what Clement, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. I think Washington Irving had some stuff to do with this. Charles Dickens was there too. And so people were like, we've got to start bringing back Santa Claus into the church. So they start singing carols. They start doing a hanging of the green service. Mm-hmm. They start talking about, we see the growth of Sunday schools, and people are starting to be introduced to Christianity. And so isn't it interesting that while the church was initially opposed in America to Christmas and to observances of that in a strange twist of fate, this new secular Santa Claus, who was not seen as a religious figure, actually helps bring Christmas back into the church.
Sort of mainstreams Christmas for a lot of families. Makes Christmas more of a family affair. As you mentioned earlier on, yes, it was initially with the Puritans and the Separatists and all those people. It was something that they frowned upon. And it was also something that was much more akin to maybe a New Year's Eve type of celebration with people drinking and all of that kind of stuff. But we've moved into a period where the church has, to some degree or another, embraced, depending on the church itself, Santa Claus a little bit, but all the things that come with Santa Claus, the wreaths, the hearths, the Christmas trees, all of that kind of stuff.
And one step further, taking it all back and looking at the approach. Saint Nicholas, a lover of the poor, a patron, saint of the children. Mm-hmm. That doesn't at all come back to us, what are we giving for Christmas, not what we're receiving for Christmas. And the message of Christmas through Santa Claus is that what I give is to be passed on. Mm-hmm. It's given to help others. It's given to create a sense of harmony and balance and unity. And even though Coca-Cola and the commercialization of Christmas, and there's a Santa Claus on every street. By the way, Salvation Army takes this whole idea and puts Santa Claus, as you mentioned, onto the corners. But I think that every time that we see a Santa Claus, it's a reminder to us to look after the children, to take care of others, to be good stewards of what we have.
To be good people. And, honestly, you talk about the commercialization of Santa Claus and the commercialization of Christmas. I remember as a child growing up, when I saw Santa Claus, Chris, I didn't think about generosity. I didn't think about giving to the poor or whatever. I thought about give me, give me, give me. I had the Sears catalog or the service merchandise catalog opened up to the back, and all my wish list was circled. So I think there is something to the idea that maybe the original Saint Nicholas and his, generosity and the morals that he tried to promote of helping the poor and stuff has been lost to some degree in our modern version of Santa Claus and Christmas.
And it's just a reminder for us to take these next few weeks in preparation for Christmas. And at the end of the day, love, service, charity, goodwill, peace, unity, regardless of your religious denomination. If you just go back to the spirit of Christmas, the spirit of Christmas was found, honestly, in St. Nicholas, way back then.
In the 4th century.
Who showed his devotion to God in extraordinary kindness and generosity to those in need. And then if you look at the jolly good man himself today, those same principles still exist. So, what a wonderful podcast, and who knew that there was so much to discuss about Santa Claus. So, Ray, the power of Santa Claus is real. It's magical. It's beautiful. And so I hope that as we drive up and down the roads and we see those inflatable Santa Claus figurines, as we see the Santa Claus in the mall, that maybe this Christmas we'll be reminded of how thankful we are and the ways that we can be Saint Nick and we can give back.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris, for another great episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. If you have comments or questions, you can email us at historyyousshouldknow@gmail.com. That's history@gmail.com. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. We're available on Sounder FM, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcast. We're basically available on a whole bunch of different platforms. We're available on Facebook. We're also available on Twitter. So until next time, I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And talk to you later.